All right, so we had a little bit of technical difficulties there. So if this broke up or weird, depending on editing, just be prepared to add this in there. Where we were a second ago was talking with Joshua Archer about the fate points. And it was very fascinating as he said fate points were a way to have students gain control of their story. And Josh, care to finish that up a little bit about fate points being this way to control your story better?
Sure. So we were talking about how do we adjudicate the issues around the position of game master being a role that maybe kids might abuse power in or not be ready for, and part of it is modeling proper behavior as a game master to the kids, and some of it is system choice. There's a role playing game called Fate. Which is by Evil Hat, and it's a generic system that can be used for many different settings and genres. And we use it with younger kids because it gives kids more agency, players more agency in the story that they're in. The primary mechanism of character advancement and rewards are these things called fate points. You get them for role playing well, or discovering something, or overcoming some sort of obstacle. And those points can either be used to advance your character's capabilities, or more often than not, they can be used as a way for you to establish facts in the world as a player that you would not normally have power to do from a player's position. So you might use a fate point to say, I happen to have in my backpack the exact right tool to unlock this door, even though it's not written down on my character sheet. Or I might be able to use a character point to say, we're trying to infiltrate this underground, criminal society, and I happen to have a friend who is part of that organization, and they're able to make introductions and get us in the back door, so to speak. And so it gives players more of a handle on the narrative than they traditionally would have. We've adopted a similar mechanism actually across all the games that we play. We don't call them fate points, but we call them character points. So we give the players in the program character point if they've done something that's really true to the way their character should be played. Maybe it's something they said that made the whole group laugh, increased engagement, or maybe they really played into one of their limitations or weaknesses, even though as a player they might have responded differently. Their character doesn't have the same capacities. So maybe you're playing a character who's lower in certain knowledges than you are, and you just have to sort of swallow your own personal knowledge and say, well, I didn't know that. Or to play a character who's a hothead, or to play a character that has a certain character flaw, if the players do that well, we want to reward them. And so these character points then can be used to, again, modify reality in the game, or can be used to re-roll a failed roll. So it gives them a little bit more leverage and control. That gives a good modeling for a collaborative relationship, not only between the players, but between the players and the game master, the narrator, so that when the kids decide, I'd like to try my hand at running a game, and often we wait until the kids have been in the program a couple of years before we do that, we'll set them up and help them come up with a story, and coach them through what it takes to be a good game master, and then set them up to run the game for their gaming group that meets weekly or whatever that is for their particular group. And we help them find success, and it teaches them that you can be a leader in a narrative capacity without being an autocrat. That it really is collaboration at all levels. Um, so that helps, I think, to really break down some of the traditional stereotypes of the game master being out to get the party, or being closed-minded and unwilling to allow others to share in the direction of the narration. Because at base, we're all deciding to sit down to the game together. And even if we're doing this in an educational context, games by definition are voluntary, and you would not want to volunteer for an activity that you weren't enjoying.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I do want to know two parts of that, really. So I'll start with one, then the other. The first one is, you mentioned in there that they take a few years to learn how to be a GM. How do you get other people to want to be these game masters and narrators in your academy? Because I look at a teacher that wants to start a gaming group, because even myself, I'm thinking of starting one at my schools. I start a gaming group, I'm one person, so I can really run a game for, typically games maximum number of people is 5. How do you get more people to want to do this and to learn how to do that, so they could also help facilitate more people wanting to play?
Right. So this is one of the bottlenecks of this activity. It certainly does challenge a traditional classroom dynamic because unless you're in a very exclusive private school, your classes have more than 5 kids. And how do you create this type of activity to happen simultaneously with a limitation on your resources? We This is one of the reasons why we don't work in the classroom generally. We work as an extracurricular activity. We have volunteers from our community, or we have employees that run the games to begin with. But I think as you start this activity, some of the participants are going to find that they are drawn to being behind that chair, being the person who's the director of the story. And others are really just happy being players, and that's as far as they'd like to take it. We try to promote the game mastering in our kids that have been in the program for more than a few years by setting up round robin opportunities where, okay, this next coming week, Billy's going to be the game master, and then after a couple of weeks later, we're going to have Jane do it. And even if they don't have any experience, we coach them through it. But I think to create a vibrant, engaging community of gamers, that's a role that really should be passed back and forth. And so setting up the expectations in the beginning that, maybe you'll kick it off as the game master to begin with, but you want to pass that role on to somebody else. You don't have to make it daunting. You can use pre-made adventures. You can use stories that have been written by other people, and just coach the kids through that activity with all of the scaffolding in place. And again, some are going to take to it readily. Some are going to need a little bit more coaching. But I do think it's a really important part of the learning process, not only to learn how to be a good character in a story, but how to hold the container. And the encouragement, I think, really just comes from showing how fun it is and having a good time with it, and having the players be in a supportive role to the game master as opposed to an adversarial. So maybe the use of things like character points or fate points is a way to alleviate the burden a bit on the game masters. Or maybe you can make it so that you have the game master position rotate every session, and they just take it from where the group left off. This also helps, I think, with teaching the separation between what you as a player knows and what your character knows. So if you were a game master and you knew what was happening behind the scenes, how well can you practice putting that knowledge to the side and acting as if you don't know it? That's a higher level type of thinking that younger kids are not as proficient at. But I think kids that are in your 12 and up range have the capacity to do this, and it really challenges them to realize that the activity is not about the winning or the advancement of your character, but about how well the story gets told, right? Traditional rewards of uh, gold pieces and beating the monster and having all of the rewards of the knowledges, it starts to be challenged when you have to say, well, my character doesn't know what I know, and how do I be true to that character? I think that type of higher level thinking is incredibly useful, especially when you start to think about skills like empathy and really trying to get inside somebody else's perspective, even though you have a different perspective. So that's another type of learning I think that can happen from maybe doing a round robin type of game mastering situation.
That is, thank you so much. I'm finally glad we got that conversation to go. Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear, or not want to hear. That was great information for people that wants to start GMing and getting other people to do it, or these volunteers. I like that about the ages. For teachers or other people that are listening to this podcast that want to try games with their students, is there a system, a game you'd recommend that is easiest to get into? Because I know a lot of teachers, even I've worked with, they're very interested in this, but they haven't done role playing games much, but they want to try to do this with students. Are there
Right.
game systems you'd recommend that are very easy, kind of like gateways? I know for myself, I use Microscope because Microscope is just a world building game. And so you start with world building and then a little bit of doing scenes in it, but they're just random scenes, can really open up to a more easy game. But what have you noticed are the games that just easily gets people into it, and especially might be easy for someone in a game master role to start it out if they were these teachers that were trying to do this for the first time?
Right. So I think that simpler is certainly better. That going with a system with not a large amount of rules is probably your best bet. So a game system like Fate, they have even a stripped down version of it called Fate Accelerated, which really is, there's like, you can play it with I think there's like 5 or 6 pages of rules that are what's necessary to know how to play, and it's flexible. So something like that allows you to tell a story without the rules getting in the way of understanding the narrative. Some kids are going to gravitate towards this type of storytelling because it really gives them more agency and more control over the narrative. Other kids are going to be gravitating towards more uh, externalized systems where it's very tactical in nature. I think that your kids that are video gamers and are used to seeing tactical layouts might enjoy a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or something like that, which has maybe some more rules, but the rules are really about physical space. And you use miniatures and a map, and it allows them to really kind of grok the scene. Where something like Fate is told in what's called the theater of the mind, where you don't depend so much on visualization as you do on your own mental understanding of the scene. So I mean, there's no one size fits all answer to that question. It's really about knowing your population. But if you've never done it before, starting with a system that isn't very complex, something like Fate or Monte Cook's Cipher system, these give you a small amount of scaffolding, and then the game is really about exchanging the story between one another. And then you can build from there. You can figure out, okay, my kids really enjoyed this type of gaming. We'll continue with these types of sort of story heavy system light systems. Or I found them itching for more control or more, I don't know, more adjudication of the scene. Like, well, do I really have line of sight on the person, for the laser shot? Or, how far away am I from the blast radius of that explosion? Those types of people, that type of thinking lends itself to more rigid or more tactical type of environments. And you'll get a knowledge of what your kids are into by how they react to what you start with. But simple first, then go complex.
Thank you for that. I totally agree with simple systems. I'm myself trying to work out a way to do not Apocalypse World itself, because Apocalypse World is a very adult system, but like a dungeon world system with students where the GM doesn't even have hit points for monsters. There is no such thing as hit points. It is the players roll some dice and it actually spells out what rules you do. So I agree with you. I love simplicity like that much more than, I have this many hit points, +1, +2. They have this resistance shielding, or even, I like you. I do like the theater of the mind games because, yeah, they get such a good story. But I will admit there is definitely also a place for those people who like a tactical mindedness and just want that brain to tactically think of things.
Right. And I think one thing that we have to also keep in mind is that a lot of kids in today's environment are used to playing video games. So concepts like hit points might be more natural to them than we first consider. They're playing games where their characters have status bars and they're, taking hits, and, they have a real sense of what it is to be, 50% down or 75% down or 3 points from dying or whatnot. So they might actually feel more comfortable in those types of systems than they would be in something that's looser. So that's just sort of the devil's advocate. Like I do find that simpler systems are easier to absorb for a majority, especially younger kids. But if you're teaching fourth graders, fifth graders, chances are they're playing video games at home and they understand these capacities. And if you take that video game and create a role-playing game that feels closer to that, they might feel more comfortable in playing.
That's a fair point, and I think that's a good thing for the audience to hear. That, yeah, play to your audience. Speaking of playing to your audience, I have a question, because this was asked at a panel I was at with a other member of the Game Academy, Aaron Vanek. He will be on the show eventually, I'm sure. But they asked, well, what about, like, do you notice any gender differences? Is it just mainly boys, girls? I know I'm a big believer that everybody's a role player, boys, girls, and everybody does want to play. But I know a lot of teachers might think, well, this is only a boys thing or a girls thing. Have you noticed running the Game Academy that there is a good mix of people playing, or that there is some good, different genders going on? What are your thoughts on that? Because I know I'm a believer everybody plays games and they all love it. My wife plays, my daughter plays. But have you noticed that to be the thing, or is that just a misconception? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that historically speaking, that the role-playing game community has suffered from being male-heavy, but those numbers have shifted over time. To today, you've got as many women and girls playing role-playing games for entertainment as you do men and boys. It might be off by about 10% or something like that, but it really comes down to, is the environment welcoming, and is the story something that's compelling? And I think traditionally, early types of role-playing games were all about violent action and reward through wealth. The kill the monster, get the treasure. And that may not be something that is off the top attractive to a female audience. They have a different socialization that they go through than boys do. And this is just on average. I think that you've got plenty of women who love to play hack and slash games, and you've got men such as myself who prefer maybe a more complex, more role play rich environment. But that being said, I think we have girls in our program. We definitely have more boys than girls in our program. I think it's maybe like 20% girls, if that. We're working hard to increase that level, and it comes down to is something that is the stigma that's going on in friend circles, that it can be uncool to do this type of stuff even at a young age. But if you can bring and cast a story that's about things that they care about, and that uses mechanisms for solving conflict that aren't necessarily violence first, you might find that it's more attractive to a female audience. You might also have a table where you make sure that you're balanced in your boy-girl ratios. We've tried girl-only tables, and we find that actually, as much as you think that might be useful, it's not as inviting as it is to have a good mix between boys and girls. I think that you see a benefit on the boys' side where they're goofy, overreacting, over violent type of behaviors might calm a little bit, and you might see the girls at the table joining into that type of play a little bit more and being more engaged. So I think that there is definitely stigma to be overcome when it comes to this type of what play is appropriate for boys and what play is appropriate for girls that we inherit, and we just have to sort of move through and say, well, no, storytelling is for everyone, and we just have to find out what kind of story you like to tell, and then work from there.
That's an awesome answer. I'm glad to hear that we are trying that. I like that idea of mixing the genders. That makes so much sense for children, because yeah, they get to get the best of both sides that way. In fact, I read articles recently, I don't know where it was talking about that they're encouraging girls to be more playful and get out there, be more rough and tumble, and also encouraging boys to take a more, I guess, calming, dialogue. The word you use is now escaping me. A more mind's eye type of play. So the merge does sound great. I'm glad to hear that. Really, right at this point, I'm trying to keep my podcast only about 30 minutes. So I want to try to keep it at that point for now. So at this point, is there anything you want to tell to the audience of people? These are teachers, educators, maybe some students, about running a kind of game academy like you're doing wherever they are. What is the first step they should do? What do you want them to do? How do you encourage them to do this? And what do you recommend to get started? Because I think that'd be great, and they can get started too, so anybody can do this. And secretly, I'm asking because I want to run it myself in where I live. So whatever you have, I'm probably going to replicate and hear the ideas. So yeah, please share.
Sure. So one of the things that we're hoping to do at the Game Academy is to become a clearinghouse for supportive materials for just this type of thing. That our mission is to get as many people involved in this activity as possible. So reach out to us and ask for pointers. We'll be trying to put things up on our website as we go forward. But getting started, I think it's a matter of just taking a poll of your population and finding out what kind of fiction and what type of storytelling they already engage in, and to match your stories and the content to those types of worlds. If you find that your kids are really into sports, you can make a role-playing game that is about a team, and what happens behind the scenes. It doesn't all have to be high fantasy or science fiction or the types of high stakes environments that we're used to dealing with. You can meet them where they're at, or you can blend those ideas. Maybe they are a football team in the year 2400 and the rules have changed. Now they have jetpacks, or maybe you are dealing with a group of individuals that are really into, I'm not sure, sewing costumes. Maybe they're costumers. So maybe they are part of the narrative that they're producing is that they're fashion designers. Or you can find the right type of story that matches the audience interests, and you're going to be far more successful if you do that than trying to bring a story to the group and saying we're going to all be in European medieval fantasy. And if they don't have an interest in that, it's going to be a hard sell. So really picking the right environment and story, starting with simple systems, showing your humility as the narrator, that you are capable of making mistakes and that's okay, and that everyone is allowed to make mistakes at the table. To laugh through those mistakes and to really destigmatize failure, because that's really the point that we want to get to, so that your players are more capable of taking chances, both within the game and outside of the game. So I guess that's where I would start. Take a look at systems like Fate. Take a look at systems like Monte Cook's Cypher system for simpler systems to start with. There are a handful of others. I will try to compile a list and have that up as one of the resources of different types of systems and how they fit certain types of educational arenas.
There are so many systems. As I say, like I just played Downfall, which is a great system by Carolyn Hobbs. And it's just a pure story system, but it also has so many elements. But I do agree that sometimes it is good to have the dice in there for failure. I will say, if you get a chance, check out dungeon world or some of the world systems. I'm just telling it to the audience because they have it's just 2 dice that you roll, and it kind of does give you descriptions of what happens when you fail and lets the player choose how they want it. So gets that, once again, that collaboration storytelling. I will say avoid the original world, Apocalypse World. While I love it and the creator is going to be on my show, it is very adult themed. So drop it down to some of the other world systems. But yeah, I agree with that. So much about the education and the failure and how that is important does seem to be such a great aspect we can teach students. I realize, Josh, that time is up for this podcast, but I'm going to have you on again because we didn't even talk about LARP. And that is like a whole section that is a passion of mine, such a great thing. We didn't even touch on it today. So we need to really talk more. But for now, thank you, Josh, for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your experiences with the Game Academy. And if anybody wants to get all this information, how do they go? Where can they go? Who should they email? Because I'm pretty sure a lot here would like to know more about the Game Academy and how they can get started and be part of it.
Sure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show. You can go to our website at http://www.thegameacademy.org. You can email me, joshua@thegameacademy.org, or info@, and it goes to a group of people that can answer questions. I'll be happy to share any wisdom that I have and get you started. We are also hoping to start up chapters in different communities. If you would like to work with us more closely, we can talk about what it would look like to get Game Academy into your community.
Thank you so much for all of that. Thank you for everything in your conversation, and look forward to, I'm sure we'll have you on again for more gaming and discussions, because everything you're doing sounds perfect for education. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.